Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us to talk about creating and maintaining safe spaces this afternoon. Today's session is being hosted by WorkBuzz's Client Services Director, Ian Barrow. He is an expert with more than 30 years experience, I shouldn't say that, Ian, should I? In the fields of culture, employee engagement, internal comms and employee experience. So he knows his stuff. If throughout this session you have any questions you would like to ask, we have the chat function available for you. So please do add them in and I will voice your questions to him at the end. So without further ado, we will get started. Ian.
Thank you, Hayley. Many apologies for the late start. I claim responsibility for that. I tried to open Zoom and all of a sudden it went into backup mode and issuing new versions and God knows what, so I started panicking. So apologies about that. I will let you know what we're covering. So we're going to look at safe spaces. We're going to give you a feel for an understanding of what safe spaces looks like and why they're important and why they're critical in today's world of work, I guess, and critical as well post-pandemic and the way people feel about work. We'll also help you understand the role of leaders in creating safe spaces, and leaders are critical in doing this. Leaders are critical in leading safe space development, if you like, and critical for people as well, so that they feel safe in the workplace. We'll also get you to reflect on your own need for safe spaces as well. There's a halfway through, there's a bit of task just to do, and we'll keep you involved in that, and it'll reflect on how you and your teams create safe spaces and create that ability to challenge and innovate within the roles. And hopefully a bit of helpful guidance at the end as well, where to start and where to look at. So what makes a safe space? Let's start with a definition of what a safe space is. And I guess in today's hybrid world, it's a safe space is whether it's real life, i.e. in person, or whether it's online. But it's a space where somebody feels they can be themselves without subject to any harassment or discrimination or comments or negative behaviours which can cause emotional or physical harm. I guess traditionally it was more about people in marginalised communities and making people feel safe. But today, I guess it's all about all of us, to be honest. We all need to feel safe. We all need to feel safe in the working environment. So, as I said earlier, we can challenge, we can motivate, we can innovate within the roles, we have a voice, we can play a part in making decisions. So it's very much about that feeling that you belong within the workplace and what that looks like. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. I think he's really good, and he gets right to the heart of some of the big topics he talked about. So he talked about when a leader makes a choice to put safety in the lives of people inside the organisation first, i.e. before themselves as an individual, people remain safe and they feel like they belong and remarkable things happen. And he talked about leaders gaining trust from people when they make themselves do things that make them feel psychologically safe. So we'll touch on two things here. How do we feel psychologically safe, and how do we bring that to reality for people in different teams and workplaces? And I think the critical thing about that is that obviously many companies, and all companies in fact, are improving the diversity inclusion efforts, but it's very much around creating that positive experience for people, whoever you are, however you feel you need to belong, and to create that engaged workforce. And the whole journey, if you like, around employee experience and the positivity of that starts well before you join an organisation. It starts in that kind of attraction phase where you see a role perhaps, or you see an organisation you want to work for and with. You go through that recruitment process and then onboarding, which is absolutely critical in today's marketplace. You go through that connection and development and engagement with the organisation. And then you have life events within that, where you have personal life events where you may go on maternity leave to have a child, or you may be long-term sick. And how do you feel, and how does the organisation treat you at that point, and how do they treat you when you come back to work? But there's also work events, corporate events, if you like, where you may get responsibility, i.e. you may be managing a team and you've never managed people before. You may get promotion to a different role. You may be doing a completely different role in the organisation. And how does the organisation prepare you for that? And eventually you exit the organisation, hopefully in a good way, and you become an alumni. But the critical point about it is that all the way through from joining the organisation, all the way through to exit, we have to have that safe space to be able to develop, to be able to connect, to be able to challenge, to be able to give our best within the organisation, within our roles. Really important and critical in the life cycle, if you like, of an employee. And it should be one of the real key priorities for any organisation to do that, to get the best from people in their journey throughout the organisation. And just to give some stats around that, there's two bits here. One is from an organisation called Culture Lab, who have just produced, it's a UK organisation, and they've just produced a report called The Power of Difference. And they looked at how difference within organisations creates powerful effects, if you like, in terms of challenge and in terms of innovation for the organisation. But all I'm trying to demonstrate here is that we don't always get it right as organisations, and we're all on a journey to improve that. So in their study, they found that 66% of the respondees to this piece of work they did found that their organisation values diversity. So that's only around 2/3 of people. Only a third felt that the leaders and managers were representative. Sorry, a third felt that leaders and managers were not representative of the broader workforce. And almost half reported experiencing offensive or embarrassing or hurtful conduct at work. So all of us are on that journey where we're trying to actually get things right and do things better. And you see at the top there the kind of results of what was happening based on those kind of behaviours in the workplace. And this data here is on the right-hand side is from our own survey. So this is circa around about 170,000 employees, surveys that WorkBuzz have done in the last 12 months or so. And what you're looking at here is a range of scores across questions that people have asked in surveys, in employee surveys. And you can see even in the high score, you know, it's safe to challenge the way things are done around here. Yeah, you get a high score of 83%, but that still leaves 17% of the workforce that do not feel safe to challenge. Pick another score in the middle. So I'm able to raise concerns or issues I have at work. Only around 77% of people. So again, around a quarter of people do not feel able to raise concerns. And finally, right at the top there, I feel like I belong at my organisation. Only around about 2/3 of people. So you can see that we're all on a journey, and obviously that's averages across many organisations and over 100,000 employees. So it's not, we don't always get it right, and it is a journey we're on. And part of this journey is learning more about what constitutes a safe space and how we create it. And just before I get into some more of the detail, I just wanted to talk about the way people see organisations and the way they feel about organisations internally. So in the middle there, you've got the kind of bubble of me. So how am I satisfied with the behaviours that impact me? How am I satisfied with the communication that I receive as an individual? How am I managed as an individual, and the information I receive and the recognition and the career growth I receive, and the ability to contribute to safety as well. So how do I feel as an individual? And a lot of that then relates to how individuals feel about the organisation and whether they stay or leave organisations. The second layer out then is my relationship with my manager. Does my manager listen to me? Do they respect my opinions? Do they value my contribution? Do they give me the safety to be myself at work? Do they listen? Do they act on my suggestions? And that role is absolutely critical, because in very large organisations with thousands of employees, that's the manager really is the face of the organisation for employees. So that relationship becomes critical in terms of creating a safe space and creating an environment where people can work within organisations. Then you come to my team. So how do I fit into my team? Does my team respect me? Do I have a voice? Do we respect each other? So, you know, if there is a heated debate within a team meeting, is my voice respected? Is my opinion respected? And what's the culture within our team across the organisation? How do we fit as a team? And do people respect us and respect our opinion as a team? And finally, how do I relate to the corporate whole? Do I have pride in the organisation, belief in the journey we're on? And does the organisation take a stand safe spaces and take a stand around creating the environment where we can all work together. Good example of that at the moment, or certainly over the last year in the press. If anybody's not familiar, the Disney corporation in Florida have been having an argument, if you like, with the state governor, Ron DeSantis, where Disney have taken a stand on behalf of employees, where they brought out a law that schools couldn't discuss at a certain level within schools, couldn't discuss diversity and inclusion, and it was so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill. And they brought that in, and Disney took a stand against that, a big stand against that on behalf of their employees, if you like, and said, look, this isn't right. But as an organization, it's cost them billions of dollars, where they're going into lawsuits now with the state of Florida. And also Disney have pulled out a $2 billion investment in Florida in moving some of the offices from California. So organizations, there are lots of organizations out there that take a stand on safe spaces and what's important to them as an organization for their employees. So does your organization take a stand either internally or externally? It doesn't have to be a Disney type example where they're taking on the state governor, but does the organization take a stand for safe spaces and what we believe in, and make sure there's a space for everybody to belong? So what factors drive behaviours and attitudes towards safe spaces? I'm just going to go into 3 key areas. I think the first one is there's changes in behaviour and the attitude of people. So workplaces and cultures have been changing for some time now, not necessarily as a result of pandemic. So what the pandemic did was actually accelerate a lot of these changes. But lots of things have been changing over time. So the disruption of traditional sectors like retail, and you can see the Deliveroo, the focus on home deliveries of services and of products. The traditional sectors have been changed for some time. And if you're as old as me, who would have known 10 years ago, even 15 years ago, that you would have been ordering a taxi via an app on your phone as opposed to standing on a street corner or making a telephone call on a landline. So that's been happening for some time. I think also what we've also seen now is that the pandemic has prompted change across a whole range of things. So different flexible ways of working, the need to keep connected as an employee, and the need to make sure that safe spaces exist and the ability to create safe spaces exist, whether we're working remotely or whether we're in the office or working somewhere else. So that's really key, that people feel that process, and people aren't excluded as well. So if you have a team that's in the office and a couple of people working remotely, how inclusive is the environment so that they're in work, feel as those parts of that team? And I think the other thing is that attitudes are changing in general, so towards the workplace. So employees are now looking for values that align with their own, in terms of that. And in terms of generational changes, that's certainly true of millennials, which probably now account for around about 50% of the workforce. So they're a group of people who look for values that match their own in their own organisation. So if their further values are about belonging and inclusiveness, it's almost an expectation, and it is an expectation that the organisation will have those values as well. And the critical point about that, what we're showing here is some data from Yahoo Finance that are looking at the average length of service now of these different age groups. So if you're I just about creep into the Gen X brackets there, if you look at that, and my average length of service in theory is around about 5 years, 2 months. But when we're down here now with millennials and the Gen Zs who are entering the workforce at present, their average working lifespan for a single organisation is around about 2 years, 2.5 years in effect. So over that 2.5 year period, we have to do a lot of work for that individual if we're going to satisfy those desires for involvement and inclusiveness and the ability to speak up and challenge. There's a lot of work to do at an early stage. So that onboarding process I showed you in terms of the life cycle becomes ultra important, really important, that you set the tone for people in those early months of employment, but also that we give them the security, if you like, within the role, that they do have that freedom of expression. And that's really important that happens quickly for these people, because they're not, in theory, they're not here for that long with us. And I just want to take a step back, and I just want to think about how you build the behaviors, if you like, around safe spaces, and you build the behaviors around your values, and you build the behaviors around the brand and purpose into the organization. And that's all about creating these guiding principles. So the guiding principles are around our purpose, our vision, our values, our strategy, our market context and brand. And that narrative and that framework that fits around those about how we create safe space, how we have values that work for us, how we have behaviors around our values that we strive for. All of those things are important in creating the principles, the framework, if you like, how we operate within organizations. But what those principles, if you like, are brought to life by influences. So they're brought to life by leadership, walking the talk and doing the walk, if you like, in terms of we have these behaviors around our values, whether it's safe spaces or whether it be innovation or whether it be challenge. And leaders have to live that day in, day out, those behaviors that they see. Similarly, in terms of how we communicate what's a safe space and what that looks like. But that critical thing is the lived experience of those values and of those principles. So culture is brought to life by people. It's not it's about how you work with colleagues, partners, customers, stakeholders, and how you deliver those messages. It's delivered by your people, by leaders in organizations, and by everybody around us. It's not just about leaders creating safe spaces. It's about everybody giving people the space to work in and being respectful of others. So it really comes down to these guiding principles, and the key issue becomes how do we influence people's mindsets and behavior across the whole organization. We know what we think and believe, they're our guiding principles. It's the behaviors in what we say and do that drive those mindsets, that drives that behavior across the organization. So it's really important that we get that right initially, but we have that behavior that ripples through the organization, supported by the corporate aims and what the corporate stand is in terms of that. I think there's also a change, certainly, again, accelerated by pandemic, in the way leaders need to lead. So pre-pandemic, it was very much about doing. It was very much about outputs, if you like. It was very much around revenue and profits and a drive towards outputs. But what we saw in the pandemic was that organizations almost became more human. They started to think about people a bit more. They started to think about how they were feeling. So initially, it was about, are you safe? Safe in terms of your health. Are you okay working from home? How do you feel about that? There was lots of questioning around people's well-being and how they feel. I think many more organizations, certainly we see that through the surveys we run at WorkBuzz, have adopted that stance in general as an organization. Again, well-being is much more of a demand by the millennial generation in terms of, we want to know how people feel. So in terms of organizational decision-making now, there's a human element to that. How do we think? How do we feel? And therefore, how do we do things around here? And what does that look like? So we're seeing organizations and the employee experience now encompass the employee more as a human being. So it's a different employee experience that we need to create as leaders. So the challenges we need to solve, one are personal issues. How do you understand how employees feel at every touch point of their experience? Do you understand how they feel at those different parts of the journey through the organization? And the measurement and understanding of that is critical. So again, we work with organizations that go through that process, and they're not just surveying once a year now in terms of employee surveys. They're surveying across the whole year in terms of, maybe twice a year, 3 times, 4 times a year. I've even worked with an organization in the past that surveyed literally every day. So they surveyed an 80th, they had 80,000 employees. So they surveyed an 80th of their people every single day, so that they had that pulse check, if you like, going through the organization of how people felt at each point. And that was across a range of values and a range of behaviors. In terms of culture, so number 2 is culture. How does the employee experience match and adhere to the purpose, value, and goals? Do leaders walk the talk? So if we're talking about safe spaces and we have values and we have behaviors around those about what's acceptable, do leaders facilitate that, and do they actually walk the talk and demonstrate those values and demonstrate those behaviors every day? The processes and systems, do they support the employee experience? And critically, that links to the technologies below. So wherever we're working from and whatever processes we're working in, do people still feel included wherever they are? Do they have the ability to work at the best? Do they feel they belong if they work totally remotely, for example? How do we integrate people into team and culture around that? And finally, voice. Our employees empowered to have a voice and feel safe. So and the freedom to challenge and innovate and be agile within their roles. So we're not talking about the ability to change their roles totally, but within the roles, within the boundaries of how they operate, do they have the ability to say, hey, we can do this better, we can do this more efficiently, I can work in a more efficient way, and having sensible discussions with leaders around that. So how do we facilitate that as an organisation? So these 5 key employee experience challenges are really critical in terms of driving a culture, in terms of driving process and systems, and in terms of driving how safe people feel within organisations. And I think the new leadership framework, you know, things on the right, strategic thinking, a results-based culture, managing talent and agility, have always been at the heart of leadership. They're the kind of things that leaders need to do, that longer term thinking, the big picture thinking, setting clear priorities, attracting key talents, and inspiring people, and initiating change. But what we've seen in this more human organisation is that people need to display humanity. They need to build trust. They need to show empathy and compassion. They need to show humility and civility, admit mistakes, acknowledge and promote others. They need to have an openness and ask questions and critically listen, communicate openly and honestly, and be authentic. And finally, nurturing. They need to coach and mentor and seek high potential. So this softer human side to the leader creates a much more balanced approach to leadership. It's not just about the hard targets and the hard KPIs. It's much more about those plus a human side, which demonstrates, if you like, that safe space environment for other leaders down through the organisation. And it just means that, you know, as though people managers don't have enough to do, that people managers, and by people managers, I mean people who manage in teams of people, have much more, a bigger role to play and more important role to play in terms of creating safe spaces and nurturing people. So mental health and well-being, you know, that as well as the day job of producing whatever service or product they've got to produce. So mental health and well-being, you know, regular conversations with people and equipping them with skills to be able to cope with that. Equipping employees with tools and technology, as we said earlier, that's a critical challenge at the moment in terms of creating safe spaces and making people feel involved. A more frequent and open dialogue so that people are not excluded in terms of hybrid meetings. Trust, allowing people to create a support structure that empowers and allows people to thrive. Nurturing, learning and mentoring and encouraging high potential, similar thing to senior leaders, very senior leaders. Reinforcing the values, focusing on outputs and not processes, and recognition. So all of these key things are really important now for people managers to get to grips with and for people managers to drive. And in terms of what people are looking for, particularly that millennial generation, as I said earlier, are looking for this kind of stuff from people managers. They're looking for these kind of behaviours. They're actually expecting these kind of behaviours from people managers. So how do we drive that through? And it might be, as people managers, we have to upskill our own selves to match these expectations as well. And the last thing I want to touch on is psychological safety. Psychological safety is important. It plays a huge part in that safe space environment. But for people to feel psychologically safe, there's a number of steps that they go through. But to give you I really like this definition by a lady called Amy Edmondson, and there's a YouTube TED Talk video linked down at the bottom there that you can look at. But she talks about a simple definition that the belief that a work environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, and that people feel able to speak up with relevant ideas, questions, concerns, and critically mistakes without the fear of being punished or humiliated. So she created that nice definition, which I really like, really tight and compact. So it's about feeling safe within your team or with your manager. You can take some risks. you can challenge, you can voice your opinion, you can innovate within reason, you can make mistakes and feel fine about those making mistakes without fear of being humiliated. And she does a really nice TED talk, and that's listed there. And what she talks about is accountability and motivation and where psychological safety fits. So what she tries to get teams to think about is that learning zone in the top right-hand corner, where accountability and motivation is high, so empowerment is high, and psychological safety is high. And she talked about the learning zone as being a place where people focus on collaboration, learning, improvement without fear, without the feeling that they're being watched or going to be humiliated for mistakes. And she tries to push people towards that. And I'll show you a tool she develops in a second, which might help. She also talks about the apathy zone, where accountability and motivation is low and psychological safety is low. And she talked about organizations and teams where people tend to fulfill the function of the role. They're not very motivated, and they jockey for position. They try and get one over on other people rather than focus on shared goals. So it's all about the individual. It talks about the comfort zone, where people enjoy working together but don't feel that challenge, so they seldom push the boundaries. I think work very hard is probably a bit tough, but they seldom push the boundaries and go the extra mile. And then the anxiety zone, where people have high accountability, motivation, empowerment, but don't feel psychologically safe. So they don't offer opinion. They don't offer any ideas how to innovate. They're afraid of getting it wrong. They're afraid to ask for help. They're afraid of making mistakes. So she talked about pushing people towards the learning zone and making sure that people land in that. And she provides a tool, if you like, so 7 questions. So the way these work is she suggests that individuals are given these questions and then and answer them in their own time, but then come to a team meeting and you discuss the kind of issues that people raise. So if you make a mistake, is it held against you? Are you able to bring up problems and tough issues? People sometimes reject others for being different or have different opinions. Is it safe to take a risk? Is it difficult to ask for help? Do people on the team deliberately undermine efforts? And are your skills valued and utilised? So these 7 questions should be given to individual team managers. They answer them in their own mind or write their answers down, and then they bring them to a team meeting. And it just helps facilitate an understanding of for team leaders of how safe people feel within the team environment. And then you can start assessing yourself, I guess, against that 4x4 grid. And have you got people in that zone at the top right-hand corner there, where they are going to work together and they feel completely safe within the team environment. And again, just to reiterate that point, I guess, Google did a piece of work where they were looking to develop, they called it Project Aristotle, and they were looking for how to create the most successful Google teams and what constituted a successful Google team. And they went right across the whole organization talking to individual teams. And they came up with this kind of focus, if you like, these kind of 5 areas that needed to exist to create a successful Google team. And number 1 by far and away was psychological safety. So they felt that team members needed to feel safe to be able to take the risks that Google needed to develop, to be vulnerable in front of others. And that's exactly what Simon Sinek talked about earlier. You know, once you become vulnerable in front of others and you admit, I don't have all the answers, if you're a leader or if you're an individual, you can then get into these other areas where people start getting involved in dependability on each other. I don't know all the answers. You have some of my answers, so we need to work close together. Structure and clarity of teams, the work that's important, the meaning of work, and the impact that creates change. So psychological safety is really at the heart of what Google try and do within their team structure and environment. But we know that individuals go on a journey on psychological safety. It's not straightforward. You don't come into a team, unless you're ultra confident, but normally you don't come into a new team or a new organization and feel psychologically safe immediately. So we go through a journey of being yourself, the feeling that you can be yourself and you're accepted for who you are, your attributes, your personal characteristics, your sexuality, whatever it might be, that you're accepted as an individual and you can be yourself. And then the next stage for that is that you feel safe to participate. So once you feel comfy in the environment, You can participate in the learning process. You can ask questions, you can make mistakes, you can give feedback, you can try new things to innovate. So you feel comfortable enough to be able to do that. And then the next step is contribution. Individuals feel that they can make a difference by contributing to a discussion or with suggestions for improvements. And the final step is challenge. So you feel safe speaking up and challenging the norm, challenging the status quo. So you may stand out as a single individual in challenging what's happening, but you feel comfy in doing that. You feel comfortable in the environment. You're not going to be ridiculed for challenging. You feel fine in doing that. So this journey from being yourself to going through learning to contribution to challenge, we all go through that process. As I said, some quicker than others if you feel totally confident in yourself, but in most cases people go through this journey in terms of psychological safety. So it's important to realize that it doesn't just appear. There's work to do in doing that, and to be able for somebody to feel psychologically safe as leaders and as people managers, we have to be able to facilitate and give space for people to do that. Unfortunately, organizations don't get it right. And I just want to give you 3 examples of where that didn't happen. So this was the unfortunate Columbia shuttle disaster in 2003. And unfortunately, these people obviously lost their lives. But what they did, NASA did a huge retrospective inspection of what went wrong and what happened, as you would expect. And Charlie Gibson, who was one of the main command people in the command room, asked why he didn't speak up. And Charlie Gibson was worried about a particular component or worried about something that was potentially happening with the shuttle before it was launched. And they asked him why he didn't speak up, and he said, "I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't speak up." And he was talking about senior leadership who were 2 organizational levels above them, and he kind of gestured with his hand in when you watch the interview, and he sort of says, you know, the people were way up there, so even if I thought something was wrong, they were just unapproachable. They were way up in the command chain, and I couldn't kind of stop the shuttle from being launched and be the individual responsible for that. And obviously, unfortunately, it cost the lives of the crew. After that event, NASA put things in place where any individual in the command room could stop a shuttle launch immediately, any individual, and it didn't matter what level you were at. If they knew something that others didn't, it didn't matter. There was a process and a protocol that was put in place. But unfortunately, it took a disaster to kind of realise that. Here's another example which has cost VW, Volkswagen, literally billions of dollars in terms of fines and in terms of putting this right. This was called the Dieselgate scandal, if you don't know about it. And basically, a small team of developers within VW created a piece of software into the cars, which was designed to fool pollution tests. So when people went to have the car tested, it said that the output of the exhaust gases were fine, but actually they weren't. And once they realised that, hang on a minute, this isn't right, everybody within that development team just clammed up. They didn't speak, they didn't mention that. And obviously all these cars went out, millions of cars, 11 million, in fact, diesel vehicles went out worldwide with this software. And obviously there you can see some of the effects of carbon, nitrogen oxides in the environment. So they've gone through huge amounts of fines and had to recall all these cars and replace them. And it was basically a development team that was trialing this software. They put it into the cars, and when they realised it was wrong to do so, nobody spoke up. So this small group caused damage to the company. And they talked to them about needing a climate where mistakes are not hidden. And it was the fear of that mistake. It was the fear of what they'd done that they hid from the organisation. It cost millions of dollars. And finally, one around silence. This is an example of Nokia. And who killed Nokia? Nokia did. And Stephen Elop, who was the former CEO, said, "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost." And it was basically around Apple and the introduction of the iPhone to the market. Some of the engineers and managers in the middle tiers, they could see what Apple was doing. They knew they had intelligence which told them what Apple was doing. But because they were afraid of approaching senior management again, because they had a culture of temperamental leaders and frightened middle managers scared of telling the truth, they didn't feel that these engineers could approach senior leadership and say, hey, we've got a problem. Apple are on the way with a device which we think is going to wipe us out. And that's why he said that quote, we didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. The finding, I guess, was from the in-depth investigation is that we may not have been able to stop Apple, but at least we'd have given ourselves a fighting chance if people would have spoke up earlier and we could have developed the phone, the Nokia phones, and challenged Apple. So again, 3 examples of psychological safety in terms of not being able to speak up in organizations, a fear of speaking up, and a fear of making mistakes and something going wrong and not being able to put that right. So I think there are necessities. Psychological safety in terms of creating safe environments is an absolute necessity. Encourage speaking up and without concern about how others will react to you. Clarity of thought, because there's no fear which impedes thinking. Support productive conflicts, and there's a range of things here: promoting innovation, reduce learning anxiety, reducing survival. So psychological safety has a huge number of benefits for leaders, for team leaders, for people within teams, for coaches. There's a massive number of benefits around psychological safety and what it provides and how it drives safe spaces within the workplace. So what approach do leaders need to take? Unfortunately, there's no playbook. There's no playbook that outlines exactly how to create a safe space. But what we do have are learnings from the pandemic. And, there are good things, I guess, that came out of the pandemic in terms of the opportunity that we've had to rethink how we create healthier workspaces. So, if it taught us anything, it's that giving employees a voice and choice, and it can be empowering and in turn increase productivity. So giving people the ability to work where they want or decide to work how they want, or the ability to have a voice, a larger voice in decision making around the organization, because hybrid working is very much a drive from the grassroots up into organizations. So it's undoubtedly helped to build trust. So there is no playbook, yet it's very much enshrined, the ability to create safe spaces and a safe environment. It's very much enshrined in giving people choice and giving people the ability to work out how they want to in a productive way. But I really want to home in on just a couple of things to help you as leaders and leaders in your organizations home in on this. My first bit of advice is don't shoot from the hip. One of the worst mistakes you can make is using ad hoc communication when we're talking about creating safe spaces. So ensure messaging from leaders is very much planned, if you like, or certainly prepared rather than just shooting from the hip. So ensure the messaging is inclusive by looking for a range of views. You could be asking for feedback on how you've communicated yourself as a leader or how the message has landed. It shows that you're not infallible and you're always willing to learn. So preparation is important when we're communicating with people in terms of creating that safe space environment. I think the other thing is, and it's, I'm teaching you to suck eggs, if you like, in a phrase we'd use in the UK, but certainly don't let one person dominate real or virtual meetings, and ensure that leaders don't override people in terms of stifling conversation or ideas. If somebody's brave enough to challenge something or challenge a view and challenge a real accepted view with a different viewpoint, be open-minded to that. It's the old adage, there's no bad ideas. You've got to take everything on board. So don't let people dominate conversations at the expense of others. I think innovation is critical as well. Learn how to embrace new ideas. As I said, even the more ambitious or unconventional ones, nothing's off limits within reason. No idea should ever be ridiculed, and all ideas have merit. So how do we drive that innovation culture within our organizations, particularly in markets which are mature, and particularly in markets which have lots of key players within the, that need for innovation is real every single day. And how do we drive things forward when perhaps we're running out of ideas? Nothing is ever off limit. and with a safe space to work in, more ideas flow from individuals, whether they be, as I said, ambitious or unconventional. I think it's important as well as leaders that we invite people into the conversation. It's not just about broadcast, it's about asking people how they feel as well. So where can we develop always on feedback channels, whether that be a personal channel or anonymous feedback channel, or asking colleagues how they want to communicate and what that would look like. People will take more risks when they know you care and have taken the time to ask how they want to be treated. So establish that from the start. What do people need and what do they want in terms of communication, and what does that feel like to them? And they will take more risks. And the studies that show that people working hybrid down a communication route like Zoom or Teams will challenge more because they feel safe within the home environment to be able to challenge. But understand that link and understand that positioning. Use debrief sessions. So use sessions to learn and improve, but not to highlight mistakes. You know, if you start with the assumption that nobody sets out to get things wrong, nobody sets out to fail, it's really important then that people will feel much more safer around you as a leader. And particularly if you show that you don't know it all, you don't have all the answers, you perhaps share some mistakes that you made in your career with individuals as well. So the sessions, approach the session with curiosity as opposed to looking for blame. So these one-to-one sessions where you're looking to take things debrief with people, but not highlight mistakes, to highlight ways forward, positive ways forward, and how we can put things right. Share the power. Again, I'm going to go back to Simon Sinek. So he talked about the biggest leadership lesson he ever learned was the simple words of "I don't know," or "I don't understand," or "I need help." And it shows that vulnerability as a leader, that it's safe for me as a leader to admit that. So it's also safe for you to do that as well. So you create a different culture and environment within a team that helps drive solutions, if you like. So there's a misconception, if you like, the experience of a leader and the experience in terms of time, because they're likely to have gone through a number of years of service and a number of experiences, that you have all the answers. And we don't as leaders, none of us do. So strong leaders know that collegiate solutions work best, and that's really important that we drive that. So it's absolutely imperative that we create safe spaces. You know, it's important that we drive those safe spaces for all the reasons stated around challenge, around voice, around the need to feel that you belong, around innovation, around how we drive our organizations on. But it's also critical for the wellness of people as well. You know, if you look at the three circles there, where they intersect in the middle, you know, we've all got a work life, we've all got home life, and we've all got our individual health and well-being, whether that be physical health or mental health. And the tiny bit in the middle where they intersect is the critical point. That should be as small as possible, and then we're all in balance. When these circles start to move in and impinge on each other, so if you're having a tough time at work and you're having a tough time at home and your mental health then suffers, that's where that bit in the middle gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's where people start to fall over and fall down. So creating that safe space, at least within the work life, helps people manage their individual health. We might not be able to do anything with home life, but we can certainly manage and influence that through work life and individual health. So in summary, I think that psychologically safe environments are really key, really important. And as an advice to leaders within your organization, make sure you're visible, curious, and approachable. You know, have productive conversations with people. Demonstrate that humility. As I said, that's part of the new leadership construct. So admitting a lack of knowledge and asking open questions and admitting you don't have all the answers is really key. Be open and willing to display fallibility. You know, acknowledge failures in an organization and actually ask for failures within the organization. We don't want people hiding things within organizations. And I've shown you those kind of three examples of where it's dramatically gone wrong for these big global companies. Value active participation with colleagues. It facilitates engagement. People feel engaged with the organization. if they can actively participate in decisions around them and their role, around them and their team, and perhaps, influence other decisions wider across the organisation. They feel absolutely bound to the organisation then, and it creates more sticky people, if you like, people who stay with your organisation longer. Use straightforward language. As I said, don't shoot from the hip. Plan it, have clarity, and it enables learning. Set boundaries. So right at the beginning, we talked about key principles in organisations. What's acceptable behaviour and what's not? What helps people feel safe? What behaviours help people feel safe within their role and within the organisation? Hold people accountable. This is really key. When we run surveys, we sometimes ask a question of, my manager kind of deals with difficult people, or my manager deals with difficult situations within the team. And it usually scores pretty average to low, to be honest. So hold people accountable to the values and behaviours you have in the organisation. And if people aren't behaving in the right way, call them out, I guess, but do it in the right way. So it's not a negative call out. It's a call out to say, these behaviours over here, what we all live by, and that's what we should be living by. And I don't think the behaviours at the moment we're doing that. So how do we do that in a positive way and hold people to account against what we need? And framework, this is really important, and it's something that's becoming more and more important to lots of organisations. If you frame work as a series of learning problems as opposed to execution problems, it reduces fear and deepens learning. So the work becomes much more fun, if you like. It becomes much more of a solution-driven occupation, so that you're trying to solve problems and you're trying to develop and you're trying to take things forward, as opposed to how do we do this in the most efficient and best way possible. And it reduces fear. It reduces that fear that I've got something wrong here, I've made a mistake, because it's a problem to solve. And on that journey of solving the problem, you're allowed to make mistakes. So how can we change the framework of work, if you like? How can we change the way people look on us work in our organisations as problems to solve as opposed to problems to execute? I'm conscious we started late, and I'm conscious that it took a bit longer to go through some of this. So I did have a slide saying any questions. Did any come up in the chat, Hayley?
Nothing's come up in the chat yet, but I actually had a question for you, Ian.
Go for it.
You've been talking a lot throughout this session around how leaders can create safe spaces, but giving people those safe spaces and the ability to be themselves is on all of us, behaving the right way together. So where does the responsibility lie for creating safe spaces? Is it solely with leaders, or is it across the organisation?
No, it's the responsibility of every single one of us, to be honest. So most organisations will have a set of values, and we'll know what those values stand for. Even if we don't have prescribed behaviours, we know what good behaviour looks like, and we know what polite behaviour looks like, and we know what friendly behaviour looks like. We have all that ingrained as human beings. So whilst the onus is on leaders to walk the talk and demonstrate what those behaviours are as leaders, and to make sure that they're mirroring those behaviours within the teams or across the organisation, it's the responsibility of us all then to mirror those behaviours and not go against the grain. So there's an onus on leaders to behave in that way and to demonstrate the behaviour that's expected. But all of us should be part of that. We want to be friendly toward our colleagues. We want to respect our colleagues. We would think that somebody else has a voice as well as ourselves. We wouldn't want ourselves to be shouted down in a meeting. So it's just about behaving in the right way. So there's a responsibility on everybody. I've concentrated on leaders because they set the tone for the organisation.
Okay, thank you. Well, as you say, you started a little late, so we should wrap up really, but you've given everybody a lot of food for thought there, Ian, and I'm sure our attendees can use what you've pointed out here as advice to shape their safe space environments at work. For those who are asking, yes, you will be getting the recording, and the PowerPoint slides will be sent out to you. So look out for an email from Emily or Fiona in the next few days as follow-up. really well connected actually will also be our next webinar. So we are hosting a webinar with our partners VivUp at the beginning of September. That is about leveraging data to build a preventative and proactive wellbeing strategy. So rather than looking at wellbeing strategies as being something that you enact at crisis point, we're going to sort of challenge that and make it have a discussion around understanding why your people are struggling and trying to be more proactive with supporting them. So please do register for that if you are around. If you did have any questions that have popped up and haven't had a chance to ask them and would like to pose them to Ian or to us, anybody at WorkBuzz afterwards, the email as always is hello@workbuzz.com, and we look forward to welcoming you on the next webinar. Thanks ever so much, everybody.